Hi, thanks for tuning in to my official YouTube channel. Happy Memorial Day, and what a Memorial Day for the year of 2022 it is. So before the official aspects of, do make sure to subscribe to my official YouTube channel, because if it wasn't for the constitutional rights of the United States of America, I, being myself, wouldn't be capable to be allowed to have these factors, and nor would anybody else in the United States of America, or even the world in quite a few capacities. Go to my website, www.susanmealing.com, also known as www.ladydorybell.com. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, save us that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Happy Memorial Day. So, I didn't really go into detail that I could sing the national anthem for a few years. Most people who knew me as a child, biologically, and or a teenager, and or an adult, probably didn't ever really know that I could sing the national anthem. And so, surprise! Guess that was figured out sometime in 2018 or 2019. And so yeah, I learned how to because of my choir teacher at Old Tenet Presbyterian Church. She taught me how to listen to others at the same time. So one of the attributes Mrs. Sauer had really worked with a lot of the students in Joyful Noise was to listen with both ears. And since Pastor Mackenzie had discussed that several times in reference to, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so listen twice as much as you speak. And so for the longest amount of time, I would guesstimate, not just in reference to after waking up from a coma after my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, that probably wasn't known to that particular level, how much I paid attention to detail. Maybe for some, I suppose it depends on who you are. So yeah, I had, and that was one of the biggest factors regarding singing or even the different plays that were involved because of listening and paying attention to detail. And so that's kind of how that went. So this year is 2022, and it will be the 21-year memorial to the attacks on the 11th of September in 2001. Not just in reference to what most people think of, which is the New York City area as to the Twin Towers, which were a part of the World Trade Center and the World Trade Center Plaza. Those who were not born and raised in the tri-state area wouldn't really know certain situations about the World Trade Center and the World Trade Center Plaza. So then the second most thought of usually has to do with the Pennsylvania field on the day of 11 September 2001. And then some people think about the Pentagon. Most people, I would guesstimate, who think about the Pentagon as to the attacks on the 11th of September 2001, probably more along the lines of the conspiracy portion, which obviously there is the aspects of, however, they don't usually think about. I'm going to guesstimate it probably has to do with because of the viewpoint of the military as to what I personally learned when in the state of Texas, because of I don't think it has to do with the camouflage regarding their uniform. I think it has to do with not as many people really understanding the history of the country of the United States of America. And because of a lot of, pun intended, regarding the color of the doors, a lot of whitewashing. Some of that important facts from history, similar to other areas of the world, those facts are still facts. And while you can bring forward the reality as to how far we have progressed as a society, where we have been capable to, the reality is it's important. So in the state of Texas, of any state in the United States of America, with the information I learned in the early 2000s, I was very surprised as to the different factors regarding the military. I could see how regarding law enforcement, there was a lot of attention paid to them. Though in reference to the armed forces of the United States of America, and in that particular reference, not just active duty National Guard and reservist, though more along the lines of veterans and even the dependents. And so the situations, even with active duty National Guard and reservist, where certain things brought forward were not necessarily as well recognized or known, which was confusing to me, because as much as Texas is proud and prideful of being Texas, one of the aspects of Texas being proud of itself is that it's a large military area. But then what type of military? When you think about that particular question. Because in regards of what happened between the years of 2000 through 2012, well, what type of military is the question? And so that's something to take in consideration. So I have not hidden who I am. I haven't hidden my childhood or my teenage years. It had to do with words. I had a head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. I had a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain that took 8.5 years to dissipate from the MRI and CAT scan views. The residual damage, sure, I could have discussions with people making attempts to utilize the words in a correct manner when in the middle of various discussions, whatever type, whether it was large groups of people or even smaller crowds. I deal with headaches and migraines, and that's difficult, even in small crowds sometimes. Mainly, I'm going to guesstimate because of my headaches and migraines and the energetic factors. So since I was a child, I could see. And as a child, a lot of times it was, oh, well, the child. You know, it's just an imagination. And then got to being a teenager, and it was, well, you know, those teenage hormones and the life of a teenager. And then when I became a biological adult, it was after I woke up from my coma. And it was after the rave situation regarding Brackenridge and that. And so then there was my biological mother and biological father and biological sister who were upset because of Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, as well as the Army situations in reference to myself. And while, yes, I know, there are certain factors regarding the military or the armed forces of the United States of America, which a lot of people who would be born in the 1980s and 1990s compared to having grown up in the 1960s and 1970s, I would guesstimate the first thought would automatically be, which, yes, it does make sense, the weaponizing. I understand that. I understood that as a child. You cannot have peace without war. It's a fact. And so the situations regarding the oceanic areas, we cannot have peace without war. So as a child and a teenager, while individuals did as they did, I took on taking care of stuff because nobody else was. And so as a child into my teenage years, I would handle things as best as I could. My buck poo, my babysitter, you know, my babysitter specifically having been from the Dominican Republic. And so her having lived on an island and having learned a few things was as it was. Then, in addition to a few other factors, well, the Atlantic area, the ocean. So by the time of 2000 and waking up in Texas, well, the individuals that I had went to Mexico with when I think I had just turned 18, maybe I might have. I don't know if I did though. I don't know if I was 18 yet when we went to Mexico. You know, hi Army. I was just awake from my coma for however many weeks or months. And you were upset about the rave in Brackenridge. Just think. Anybody in CID at that time. Nonetheless, you know, what guys could be parents. And so I can almost envision, do you know what you did, young lady? And so do you know how far Mexico is from Fort Sam Houston? No. I actually was asked that. That's why I'm making the joke right there for this particular lecture. Monologue, sermon, whatever. Nonetheless, so, well, how else do you protect people on land in the United States of America? And so when I was invited to Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, it seemed ideal. And there was a disagreement because of. And usually it went back to the same thing. Just a child, just a teenager, just dealing with that in comparison. And so then the Army, and so that whole factor. So I have done what I could, especially after waking up from my coma, mainly being in medical hold unit. The guys in medical hold unit would know that whether or not they believed it, if they were to look back, they would know I worked diligently to better myself. There would be those who would know how difficult it was to get me to count to 10. There would be those who would know or learn later that I had assisted with the UCMJ in basic training, and yet I couldn't remember rank. Rank is so much easier than the UCMJ in comparison. Then you have individuals regarding having to teach me to be capable to relearn the names of colors. And so there's a lot of memories in quite a few different ways for me, in different areas as well. And so by the time of, going to Mexico, is there water nearby? And some of the guys in the car, their response was, of course there's water nearby. What water? What water is nearby? And so they went over certain rivers, and I was like, no, something seems, what type of water? Do you have an ocean? Do you have an ocean near here? Because I hadn't ever been to Texas before. And the guys were like, no, it's not really an ocean. It's the Gulf of Mexico. That's all it is. What type of water? What is this? And so essentially I learned it was the Gulf of Mexico, and there is some connection to the oceanic waters. So by the time of middle 2003, I had this, well, the closest to it understand would be in the year 2011, a male that I had known, and it was like, I need to go to the water. I need to go. That'd be like 2003, only, well, about the same. I need to go to the, and so I went and took care of what I took care of, and so it was as it was, and just a quick little reminder, just remember, because it's Memorial Day, so 2/3 of a pun, because scuba diving, and gotta pay attention to that amount of oxygen in the tank. Okay, that's fine. I can acknowledge in this particular lecture, it might not be the funniest of funny. That's fine. I can make fun of myself quite easily and be perfectly content doing so. Nonetheless, so it makes it really difficult for other people to make fun of you when you can make fun of yourself better than they could ever make fun of you. I'm gonna guesstimate that. I wouldn't know, when you can make fun of yourself better than anybody who could try. It's like, oh, well, yeah. I can completely make fun of myself in so many ways. It's very easy. I have my saying. My saying makes fun of myself all the time. So, yeah, but anyway. So in reference to, I want to go swimming. I have to go take care of some business. And so there is that. Nonetheless, so in the year of 2001 though, and having given birth to my son after only being awake from my coma for less than a year and a half, and the actual number, I did the best I could. And when the attacks occurred on the 11th of September, I was sleeping. Now, I've gone over referencing time, and there are a multitude of times in reference to Memorial Day to remember. It's not just the time frame of the Iraq and Afghanistan war. It's also in reference to Desert Shield and Desert Storm. It's in reference to the Vietnam War and the Korean War. It's in reference to World War I and World War II. It's in reference to the various battles in between. It's in reference to including the American Revolution. Because to remember where history began. And so in the modern time frame, in my opinion, when you look at the current generation, yes, it's going to be 21 years since the attacks on 9/11 in 2001. This year in 2022. It's been that length of time. And so while some individuals pay attention to whatever details they pay attention to, the fact is, it's going to be 21 years since the attacks. And while other people, such as in the year of 2004, had already forgotten, I wouldn't be surprised if there were certain similarities that people in the Hawaiian area regarding Pearl Harbor could take into consideration as to those particular situations, as to the viewpoint. Very different. It's a smaller-ish area in the combined factors to the Northeast. It's out in the middle of the Pacific area of the ocean compared to the continental United States of America, 48 states, and yet the most impacted because of Pearl Harbor. And so in regards of the time frame as to going to be 21 years, I wouldn't be surprised if there were people in the references of as to the Northeast area, as to the overall, even in reference to the Pentagon, North Virginia and Washington, D.C., as to the most common thought being to New York City. And yet, there's obviously still Pennsylvania, and then the state of New Jersey. But there's also Maryland and Delaware as to those connected portions because of. And unless you know the East Coast, then there's all the way down to Florida and all the way up to Maine. Because unlike other areas in the United States of America, the states aren't as large. All you have to do is look at a map. If you look at the state of Texas, how much of the Northeast can you actually fit into the state of Texas? Similarly, when you take in consideration California, how much of the East Coast, how many of the states of the East Coast could you puzzle piece fit into California? And then you have that to take in consideration. So, in regards of Pearl Harbor to World War II and 9/11, or the 11th of September 2001, to Iraq and Afghanistan. You have those factors. Though World War II, I wouldn't be surprised if the Korean War had something to do with the intel at the time, because of the GPS coordinates, because of the satellite imagery, because of several other factors that would be in consideration. And so you have space that when was it learned about the various Apollo missions in comparison to the time frame as to World War II to the Korean War? If you take that thought process to review regarding NASA and other space stations orbiting the globe of the Earth. And so, well, you gotta remember. And yes, I acknowledge, I laughed in the face of scuba diver instructors in the civilian recreational sector. I did not go, mwah, ah, ah. No, I didn't do that, but I did laugh in their face. Because when I told them that I was gonna go to the Vandenberg, these civilian recreational scuba divers, they were like, but it's 115 feet to the top of the tower at the Oriskany. Yeah. You know, kind of similar to how I had listened to an official YouTube channel from some Navy SEAL description as to 40 feet in the water being considered as dangerous territory for a rebreather. And so, you know, I mean, if you go to my website, www.susanbling.com, which is also www.ladydorybell.com, and go to my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, I have a picture I took in the year of 2017 where my son is standing underneath the top part of the wing for a hull area. Which is not even the entire hull. There's still other pieces that go to that particular factor. And that's for an old submarine. Oh, 115 feet to the top of the tower. Oh, okay. That submarine, how is it upside down, you know, because otherwise that's a propeller and that's not the entrance to the hull. And if it is a propeller or, you know, a doohickey bob, the like on an airplane, the rudder, if it's a rudder with a with a ladder installed, well then think about that. That's just a rudder, and it's not even the whole rudder. Because a rudder is gonna have a point. You know, I tend to do that every now and then in reference to, I like words. I did take Greco-Roman Latin. I was so excited for that. I'm glad I did before my hereditary on Palm Sunday in 2000. I will say that. Nonetheless, also glad I was really into science because you learn a lot of Latin words, as well as Greek sub-words as far as the root words and prefixes because of how words are actually formulated. And so, you know, but yeah, so I saw a video on YouTube, which was from the 1940s or 1950s or 1960s, where Navy SEALs, they scuba dove underneath the area of a submarine to go into the submarine. Well, most likely that submarine was not at the surface of the water. So when this guy in the civilian recreational sector was like, it's 115 feet to the top of the tower. Yeah, kind of as that other official YouTube video that had the description of how 40 feet for a rebreather is considered a dangerous depth level compared to the 130 feet that you get to go scuba diving with a non-rebreather scuba dive gear setup. Yeah, okay, so you have more stuff on your back. For those who don't know, go research it. You got more stuff on your back. compared. Yeah, compared to what Navy SEALs do? Oh, yeah, sure. 40 feet. People do free dives a lot deeper than 40 feet, but these guys with the rebreather, woohoo! 40 feet. Yeah, similar to the, 110 feet or 115 feet to the top of the tower. Yeah, sure, or nowhere near close. Not, that's like shorter than a football field. Do you know that? Do you know that 115 feet is shorter than a football field? You should think about that. Do you think a submarine can, if you were to stand the football field upright like a door, do you think that submarine would be like this to that? If you do, well then, attention to details is important by far. Nonetheless, it's kind of like some people saying something. A guy had told me this, some others had told me it was like 150 feet supposedly to the top of the tower. At the Vandenberg. Yeah, okay. Kind of like it's 40 feet. That's considered a dangerous depth level for Navy SEAL. So, 40 feet with a rebreather. Yeah, I'll remember that. Yeah, because, why not? It's Memorial Day weekend, so happy Memorial Day weekend. Hopefully this comedic satire might uplift some spirits, because why not? And so, 40 feet, I'm sure that there might be somebody who's been in the Navy SEALs at some point in time, one or two guys. I did get to meet-ish for a few 10 to 30 seconds the senator, congressman, Dan Crenshaw. Maybe he could talk about how the possibility that a submarine probably gonna need a little bit more room than 115 feet. If going around the area of the Oriskany, so that way it doesn't knock over. Gotta make sure it still stands upright. Hypothetically, I don't know what the tonnage weight is regarding, from a propeller from a submarine. You can see wind turbine propeller blades go by on the road, but you can't see a propeller blade for a boat. A naval vessel boat, I should clarify. You don't really see one propeller blade the way you see wind propellers for the wind turbines. But you can see those on the road all sorts of times driving by on those semi-trucks. I haven't ever seen one propeller blade. Not one. I haven't even seen like the keel of the ship part ever be shipped, pun intended, across the United States of America. Haven't ever seen that. Haven't for, a U.S. NS naval vessel. I haven't ever seen that. I mean, sure, maybe I'm the only person who hasn't ever seen that. How many people have seen a wind turbine blade on the highway? I've seen quite a few. I haven't ever seen any piece of a military-grade naval vessel ever be shipped across. I'm sure that hull of the submarine probably took quite a bit to actually ship across wherever it went. In a subverted way. In comparison, maybe. However, it doesn't change the fact I haven't ever seen, even a tower piece regarding a Navy military vessel or a Coast Guard military vessel. I've seen little tugboats to a Coast Guard vessel. You know, perspective. I don't even know if some of the boats I've seen being towed in the rear have even had the capacity to tow a coastie boat that could tow a boat. I'm not certain I have, you know, so just is as it is. I'm gonna guesstimate most boat yards are probably near a port, probably. And so maybe there's an oceanic water nearby. I'm sure there are some for lake areas. They're probably smaller because it's a lake. Even it could be a great huge size of a lake. It might hypothetically be smaller than the ocean, even in the superior type sizes of lakes. Don't wanna assume. So, you know, you've got, for those who know about boat diving in the Great Lakes, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the boats that are out in the Great Lakes probably was like the Trump boat parade in 2020. And since Navy and Marine guys and coasties know how that they can get, not that they're the only ones, obviously, hypothetically, maybe there's some Navy guys or Marine guys or coastie guys who could think as to, you know, more power, and then think about that Trump boat parade, and then there's the Great Lakes. Except in comparison, you know, I wouldn't be surprised at all in any capacity. I could be wrong. I could see it though, where, you know, a bunch of military guys, whatever branch, coasties and or Marine Corps and or Navy, being like, I can build a bigger boat than you can build, and my boat can go faster than your boat can. And you know, the version of Beyonce, and you know, no, my boat is gonna be bigger than you know, there is the Titanic situation. And so then there's the bottom of the Great Lakes for that particular reference from some of those in that regard, because that downward tonnage weight, kind of a smidgen bit of pressure and water movement, again, as people in the area of Lake Travis and the other areas for certain boat parades could take in consideration. Would not be surprised. And those situations regarding the Trump boat parade in the year of 2020, well, those are private owned boats compared to, well, there's the Lexington and the Gulf of Mexico area. And so just think of a bunch of those doing the Trump boat parade. To me, it makes sense. I could easily see how that could go that way. It seems, it makes sense to me. Because again, military guys know how they are. I did not graduate basic training. However, I wouldn't be surprised if there were some military guys who could think about their viewpoints as to, and in conjunction to, government contractors for building stuff. Well, no, my boat can have more of a downward draught than yours. You know, sort of thing with the, what is the popping a wheelie version of a motorcycle? So, I'm popping a wave or something like that. you know, whatever the terminology would be, you know, because I'm sure there's some coasties who wouldn't have any idea in that whatsoever, as far as, and no Marines or Navy guys who could ever think about that. For those on land, such as the Army and the Air Force, which then you have that knowledge, what are law enforcement for? For speeding is the answer for this lecture, among some other stuff. Just think, okay? Why was I like, I want to go to Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment? You know, Indiana, 1999, for an example. Why? Just that Honda Civic with the 442 idea, just saying 1993 version because of the lighter chassis and stuff. And so, in comparison to other Honda Civics. But anyway, what would that have anything to do with? Well, I could go to the Marine and Science Technology School. Anybody who's ever been a passenger in the car with me might have an idea-ish. High insurance companies. High law enforcement. I don't usually speed unless I have a reason to. So, you know, that is as it is. Nonetheless, you know, there's that aspect of high Space Force. Yeah, hi. And so, I remember, so I suppose pun intended on that particular factor. So then there's that, and then hey NASA, because, you know, I mean, how fast is light speed compared to speed limits on the road? Now, I thought about going to be an admiral. I'm just saying, I could completely envision the Great Lakes area being that way, because in that particular reference of the knowledge that in the year of 1999, I thought it would be awesome to put a 442 block with NAS in the engine, making it a dual exhaust in comparison to the singular. And that was the small versions of the modifications that I was thinking of at that particular point in time, which I had a disagreement with my boyfriend at the time. He tried to say that there was no way that would be possible, and I said, you don't know anything. And then he tried to tell me that he knew everything about mechanics. And I just was like, well, that's nice. That's nice. No, it's cute. You think that. That's okay. No, that's okay. You can think that you know everything. I can let you think that. Yes, you can think that. I, on the other hand, know for a fact that you could put a 442 in a Honda Civic, a 1993 model especially, and you know, put some NAS in that, and those who know that. I'm not saying I like to drive fast at all. In the year of 1999, however, what I am gonna say is the warning ticket was for 127 miles an hour because that was the highest speed the radar could pick up. I'm not gonna say I was going faster than that. What I am going to say is it was redlined, and a 1993 Honda Civic, I think it goes up to 180 miles an hour. So, you know, without that 442 block in it. So I'm not saying that I have a smidgen of a lead foot. What I am saying is I don't speed for no reason. So, and I'm also not saying that I can drive fast by technicalities. I'm not saying that this could be a reference point as a joke as far as my hair color. What I am saying is I liked Tim the Toolman Taylor. So I can easily see in the Great Lakes area as to how some boats got on the bottom of that water. And that particular reference of the Trump boat race in 2020, or parade, in the year of 2020. I remember that being a thought when I went through scuba diving in the year 2009, and I had discussed going ice diving and the precautions that I saw that were necessary in that particular reference. So the irony of 2009 and how you get the number 2 is 1 and 1, and then the number 9. And that would have been easier to call 911 in reference to few situations, hypothetically. Nonetheless, you know, I've been working on my Medal of Honor art project stuff. And so, 2000, a lot of trips. And then there's the USA Boulevard phone call in that reference. And if I remember correctly, her spirit's physical looked Asian in comparison to Caucasian. I wouldn't be capable to tell which particular Asian, though I would guess Chinese or Japanese because of the spirit tone of where that would be and the shape of the eyes. And that was in 2004, if I remember correctly, when I had that particular situation occur. Nonetheless, there is that confusion for me regarding the state of Texas in the years of 2001 through 2013, and that reference as to the military. And while, yes, I know I've had odd circumstances, to put mildly, whether you take in reference of my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000 and in the conjunctive aspects to Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, though also the Army factor, and Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and being in a military installation that mainly trains cavalry and combat arms, in comparison to the fact that I was going into logistics. Yes, the other females, every other female that was in my basic training unit had been in some version of the medical field, whether it was an x-ray technician or a phlebotomist or a medic or whatever aspect. I was the only one who had automated logistical specialist as my MOS. All of the males either had combat arms, MP, or a medical field MOS. In comparison, there wasn't anybody that was going to go to Fort Lee that was going for the logistics capacity other than myself. And so there was that situation to think about as well, and the knowledge of my clearance because of the situation at the time when I was 17. So when 2001 occurred, and for me in the time frame, I didn't look at the clock. I'll be honest, because I can only be honest. So the news report, though, was live. And when I was awoken in the state of Texas, in San Antonio, that was that point in time. Now, I had spoken. The Gateway desktop computer was not far from the bed that I was laying in. And my newborn son was, swaddled in pillows and stuff like that, and made a little bit of a raised, kind of like a bunker in comparison. Nonetheless, I spoke. And that was before the Pennsylvania field. That was reported in the same capacity. And so I've made it known as to who I went to go speak with as to the attempts. And if however it was taken is however it was taken, though I made attempts to actually assist in comparison. So he was a tech sergeant in the Air Force, and there's the aspects of, and I made attempts. So while some people have whatever viewpoint they have, I've not gone out of my way in certain references, and yet in others I have. And so while in the year of 2004, people in the state of Texas were already annoyed by the situations as to the 11th of September in 2001. It wasn't even 3 years. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if in reference to Pearl Harbor, there are those who survived that could recognize certain factors of. And then the reasons to end stolen valor among quite a few other situations. And so I had met a guy in the year 2009, and I made fun of him. Not in a mean way, just being myself, not in a, it was more of just in sarcasm. And so he had said he was called to Howley in Hawaii. And when taking in consideration as to how many people made attempts to inform, and that's on a smaller area. So when you take in consideration the after effects of my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, and you got the military base ES in San Antonio, the situations in reference to being pregnant and delivering only 1.5 years and 2.5 years while still having a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain, and both the military as well as the civilian population, and so on and so forth. Well, in my childhood and my teenage years, I made attempts to explain things in regards of the oceanic waters, as well as the forest area in the backyard, Well, there's probably not nearly as much light pollution in certain areas of Hawaii. So, in regards of that particular male, well, I teased him and said, well, you know, why would you think you'd be called a Howley? How many times did they lie on their backs looking upward and see what was in the sky, screaming? How could you not see that in that reference? How couldn't you pay attention to those details? Among other factors that would be to take in consideration as well, though that would be something for others to review, those references. And so there's this guy I knew from high school, and he went into the Navy. Now, I was in Crystal Lake South, and he was in Crystal Lake South, and he had been informed of not only the after effects of my head injury, though also had thought it would be funny to tell my then, after the Justice of the Peace husband, that he was my boyfriend, as a practical joke, as a prank. And it was known I was already pregnant with my son. And so, you know, some people take that really seriously. You can't be joking about that. So those particular factors in that reference, which I wouldn't be surprised in reference to a few situations regarding Crystal Lake, Illinois, and those particular factors. And unlike some people, I was born and raised in New Jersey, going throughout the tri-state area. And that wouldn't impact Illinois the same way it would impact where I was born and raised. So yes, the 10-year reunion compared to the 9-year memorial to those references. And those situations regarding Illinois. And I made attempts in the state of Texas to explain that. Was as it was. However, those Midwest and Southern areas and certain viewpoints in comparison, there were individuals I had informed I was going in the military to, and their responses were, but you're a girl. I'm a female. Or, well, you know, don't you have something else you could do? Because, you know, it'd be prettier. Do you think that low of me? That only my physical attributes are important to you in comparison to who I am? Shouldn't you be capable to appreciate my physical attributes while appreciating my intellectual capabilities? And it was as it was regarding that. And so, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if that was a needless problem in reference to a few situations, because there's the time, and it was in 2001 that occurred with Kenny Tank, and I wouldn't be surprised if certain others would think that that would be a funny prank, but it's not a prank. And so if individuals decided to do that in regards of my scuba diving, that, you know, don't go scuba diving, such as Cactus Jack or Jeffrey Kirkendall Jr., wishing in comparison to the reality. And so those types of needless games and needless problems because of the factors of. And since that sort of World War II reenacting aspect, in conjunction with the live action role playing and being so close to the Bastrop, Smithville, Excalibur Fair situation, literally 1 year later, as to at Nine Lives Books, the situation occurred during the time frame literally no more than a year and a half after Excalibur Fair, in April, if I remember, March or April of 2005, as to those needless situations. And so those types of people going up to the New York City area, so those TRF types, those Excalibur Fair types, those Renaissance Fair types, in comparison to going to the tri-state area, I could easily see the temper tantrums, because let's move, we got stuff to do, in comparison to those particular types. And then, you know, those situations regarding the pagan community and certain connecting factors to what's supposed to be considered the biological adult consenting lifestyle, in comparison to some of the factors as to what occurred. I wouldn't be surprised. And so in comparison, where scuba diving, you have a certain amount of time that you're allowed in the water. Either it's the time frame to the timetables and or what you got as far as to breathe. And then time's up. That's it. So before getting into scuba diving, I had obviously known my childhood and my teenage years and my early biological adult years in comparison to what other people had been told, their opinions, biases, etc. Whether in reference to my ex-in-laws and or my biological mother and or my biological father and or my biological sister and or whatever connections thereof. And the biases and opinions and feelings and emotions in comparison to reality. And so when you take in consideration in 2001, well, my biological mother, biological father, and biological sister were in Illinois. And the first situations I go take care of are not them and are not their safety. It's for the safety of the United States of America. In comparison, I didn't call my biological mother until later in the day. I went and took care of what I needed to take care of at the first starting point of. And so while the three of them had one another to deal with those particular factors, well, I was taking care of my son. I was taking care of myself. I was taking care of the city of San Antonio. I was taking care of the state of Texas. I was taking care of these situations in the references of, especially by the time of maybe a week later, as to how that went. So, you know, I wasn't in the capacity, not that there was anything I could have done anyway, in comparison to what occurred in regards of my daughter, my son, and I, obviously. And so instead of stirring up needless drama, it was as it was. Well, they made the decisions as they had, and they have to accept accountability for their stupidity because that's their responsibility as far as the choices in the years thereafter. So in regards of the time frame of 2004, where people were already as they were, well, in memory or Memorial Day weekend, yeah, sure, barbecues are fun, fireworks are great, and yet at the same time, without certain individuals, you wouldn't have those luxuries. Without the Constitution of the United States of America, what do you wear to go swimming, females? When you take that in consideration, I didn't really ever get into bikinis in the water. I made an attempt and didn't go really well. And so I had a type of a bikini in New Jersey. It was a halter top and boy shorts. And I went to get a second one when I was in Illinois, but the bottoms were way too big in comparison to my size. So there's those factors, those situations. I think it was a green and white checkerboard type of a pattern, or a darker green and white checkerboard pattern. Nonetheless, it was as it was. However, the facts as to Memorial Day and it being the month of May, well, there's June, July, August, and September, 4 months to the 21st memorial of the attacks on the 11th of September 2001. So unlike Pearl Harbor, where there wasn't the social media, there wasn't email, there wasn't Facebook or YouTube or any of those capacities, there wasn't Twitter or emails of whichever company. Well, since the 11th of September 2001, there have been. With the combined time between World War II through to 2001, regarding all of the military aspects, and whether regarding the civilian sector as to law enforcement and or fire department and or EMS and or whatever aspects of the civilian sector, the military aspects. And yet so many make different things regarding without the patriotism and the gratitude for those constitutional rights. As a biological female at birth and still a biological female, I have been appreciative of my constitutional rights despite what I was dealing with in other factors, because it's the truth. And so with the progression of science and technology throughout the time, it's supposed to be capable to be easier to remember. And yet, how quickly so many have forgotten. So what would it be to the equivalent regarding back in the time frame of World War II, and or the Korean War, and or the Vietnam War, and or Desert Shield, and or Desert Storm, before Afghanistan and Iraq? What would that translate to? And so then there's the situations of the irony. If you look at IA in regards to Iraq and Afghanistan, well, you have the state of Iowa. And the irony of my Medal of Honor art project trip in the year of 2018 and Captain John Morning, that reference to Medical Hold Unit, which he knew about the rave and Brackenridge. He was informed of that. Obviously, Captain Beer was informed of that. That was a part of the Article 15. And so CID at the time knew of that, but I was 17 years old. And in comparison to whatever was told to who I actually am, then there's that to consider. So there's a few situations to review in that regard. Then additionally, you have, it's going to be 21 years. So even if you were an infant, the way my son had been an infant in the year 2001, well, 21 years. If you were a child in elementary school, it's still 21 years. In reference to if you were in middle school, it's still going to be 21 years. If you were in high school, it's still going to be 21 years. If you were in college, it's still going to be 21 years. If you were out of college and working, it's still going to be 21 years. That doesn't change. Which is an irony for those who know about military processions. And so, President of the United States of America at the time in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan, has a quote that freedom is no more than one generation away. What is a generation? Around 15 to 21 years, to 25 years, 15 to 25 years. And so the choices, because you can review that. So what choices have been made in regards of these 21 years that's coming up? So this Memorial Day, you have the various constitutional rights and amendments, the knowledge of. I am for Second Amendment rights. I'm for the Constitution of the United States of America. The thing about it though, when it comes to the Second Amendment right, I have very much disclosed repeatedly the capability to maintain the firearm, depending on the correct capacities of proper usage. And in addition to that, being capable to utilize it not only correctly, but accurately. That's important. Accuracy is important. And so in order to maintain that, well, that goes to the 10 Commandments. And so in New Jersey, you didn't ever have open carry in the 1980s or the 1990s, or the 2000s or 2010s, 2020s. It's just not something we grew up with in the Northeast. And yet, there is the 2020 election cycle and election integrity and the viewpoints of, and how important the truth actually is. So, while some people have their opinions as they have their opinions, that's something to take in consideration. Very much for the Second Amendment. I believe in the rights of people to protect and defend themselves with proper, has to be proper, within reason. If you go above that, of what would be considered as reasonable, then that's a different capacity. And you have to be held accountable for what you are responsible for. And so those particular situations from 2000 through 2013, And then 2013 through 2019, and 2019 through 2021, and this is the year 2022. So it's going to be the 21 year to remember. Because I decided to fly my New Jersey flag in San Antonio, Texas, because I remembered. Is that the equal as to the Texas flag? The American flag being overhead. Wasn't in the ground, it was on the building of the wall of my house. My house being the sponsor, one and only sponsor, just a reminder, in a homeowners association in the state of Texas. For those to take in consideration, I don't know, I know that there have to be some who could, look at the fact that I'm gonna listen to Eminem. I don't care, I'm a E with it. That's nice, I didn't graduate basic training, I wanna listen to Eminem. I don't know which would be bigger, internal, what have you, to that, although I suppose possibly being in the state of Texas and flying the New Jersey flag at the equal and not even knowing anything about the flagpoles except for having the United States of America's flag overhead. Still correct though. Nonetheless, it wasn't in the ground. Which, by the way, that's when the shed was an issue after the lawnmower aspects to consider. So if there's any elected officials associated with anybody in that particular neighborhood, then there's that to take in consideration because of being born and raised in New Jersey. Though depending on, would they be local and state, or would they be federal level? Because somebody federal level would have a little bit of a different knowledge. In comparison though, also where did they go to school? Because there's that. And so if they went to school in the Northeast, oh, I could see that in a different capacity because of the if factor. Finding out that there's someone who was born and raised in New Jersey, 15 and a half years, and the tri-state area, 5 boroughs. Yeah, I could see how someone who went to college out in the area who, well, how would people in Austin know how college stuff went? Which is irony because, my biological sister went to Southwest TX, I think is what it is. I think it's SWTX for college, San Marcos, or SMTX, whatever it is. And, she had brought up how it's a party school. And so then there's Southwest. Southwest. So yeah. Yeah, so there's this reality of film images compared to digital and those particular situations, to think about, because I'm not the only one who had a cell phone. And so, my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susankneeling.com, also the same as www.ladydorybell.com. Well, I gave warnings to people about technology, and I was made fun of for a lot of different aspects. Is as it is, nonetheless. So, with Memorial Day and the amount of veterans, active duty and National Guard and reservists, as well as dependents throughout the state of Texas, Well, there are those factors to additionally take in consideration as well. And so I have a bit to remember. It's a little bit more. I had to work harder by a lot. In a lot of ways. So from 2019 through 2021, though even a little bit into 2022, I've had to verify and clarify a few things because of the situations and hypotheticals. Because how else would I be capable to work on remembering certain factors about the 5 boroughs, the land areas along the coastline, the bay areas, the way the actual river had been regarding the differences to the water. Because when I went through, I haven't ever seen those waters so smooth compared to what I remember as a child. Those were choppy waters in regards of the river areas and the bay areas. I haven't ever seen those river areas without waves. That was the first time I've ever seen that. I don't know if anybody else ever paid attention to that. That's something I noticed though. It's very odd not to see any waves or ice caps the way I was accustomed to seeing. There have to be some news video footage that somebody could take into consideration, or maybe some pop culture reference in the comparison of to the Northeast, to take that viewpoint as to what the waters actually were, that rage in the waters because of the reality as to the movement inward from the oceanic areas. The Atlantic, it's a vicious area when it comes to. And so it was softened a little bit, and I could tell, because that amount of just smoothness, the river areas, I haven't ever seen that. I suppose I can make a joke in reference to how my hair was when I was in Washington State after a certain year, to how I wound up there. Comparison to where the East Coast is, which would have been easier for me instead. However, it is as it is. So I'm surprised as to a few factors regarding, I wasn't ever informed of anything that occurred in the state of Texas while I was in Washington State. So maybe for those who might know or would, because I was told something happened, I wasn't told what it was though. In the year of 2020, nobody informed me as to any occurrences other than the sanctuary was closed down in the DFW area. I was told about that. That's it. It's the only thing I was told. So if there's something that occurred that I wouldn't know, well, obviously I wouldn't know because I wasn't informed. So in reference to remembering and Memorial Day, well, there's those facts. So with my updates to my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susanmuling.com, the same as www.ladydorybell.com. Similarly, in regards of the scuba diving sector. Well, suppose that remembrance. And so did the clarifications and verifications and updated a few things so that way there was that understanding, because I could see without having to put it in words for myself as to the similarities regarding that overall combined of 2000 through 2013 as to the 1980s into the 1990s, as to the tri-state area. And then there are the factors of, because in the reference to scuba diving and international scuba to scuba toys, well, Crystal Lake South to Crystal Lake Central. And having made the decision in reference to life because of what I noticed. So I think it was homecoming that we had gone to the dance together. And with the way situations were going, because of how my biological mother was, how he would eat something she had cooked and then he'd fall asleep. I couldn't allow that. I had no words. I'd already made attempts to explain things in New Jersey for years. Made attempts in Illinois as well, though that was as it was. Instead, I dealt with the, oh, I know how people are from New Jersey in comparison. And so, made a decision, because I'm about life. It would be irony regarding Sapphire, now that I think about it, it would be, if that's the same individual, which would be irony, especially because of that particular football game. I think it was, because that's the only football game I went walking on the other side of the football field. And so that's kind of irony, if, you know, because this one guy had said his dad was a certain type of photographer. And so, if he was back then, well then there's a different irony of ironies. Nonetheless, then the irony of ironies of having went scuba diving. And yet, it is as it is for the references of. Because it is as it is. So yeah, you know, I can make fun of myself in a few regards. Fairly simple for me to do that, actually. And so, in reference to certain types of situations, because obviously it's not just the FBI in that reference, there's obviously CIA headquarters that were out in the, or marshals or whatever versions of, in New York City. The World Trade Center and the World Trade Center Plaza. It wasn't just two towers, but those two towers that were seen, as far as that particular time frame, those two had, I think these, I mean, you, the further up you went, the less number of businesses you had because of going up the towers. And so, there's those who are needing to be remembered. It is ironic regarding 2019 in Washington State as to Memorial Day being in May and the push that I had. So, in reference to myself. And so, then the time frame of 2019, the scuba diving sector of the civilian recreational areas. And, those realities, because those who would be a civilian recreational scuba diver in the state of Texas or certain other areas going out to the oceanic waters of the Northeast, well, that's a completely different area of the water. It's a fact. You don't play games out in those waters. You literally do not play games in the Jersey Shore. You can see people who will go to the beach and play volleyball. You don't ever see anybody actually playing games in the oceanic waters of the Jersey Shore. You see it on the boardwalk, not in the water though. You don't see people who throw rings around or do the volleyball with the beach ball. You don't see that. If you do, what you see shortly after is somebody being sucked out by the rip current or the undertow. You don't ever see anybody who plays games the way you see in the Gulf of Mexico at all. That is a hazard and a high risk that can cost you your life doing that sort of stuff in the Atlantic. And while yes, in the southern, below the Mason-Dixon line Atlantic area of the ocean, that's very soft compared to the New Jersey shoreline. I've made attempts to explain this to people, even in reference to 2009, people just referred to the Gulf of Mexico in comparison to the Atlantic. Then they tried to claim certain southern states in reference to the Atlantic compared to the Northeast. And it was as it was, but there are certain references similarly. As a biological female at birth, looking as I do, there's no country in the year 2009 that I would have been capable to do so. As far as earning my 26 scuba diving certifications, despite what I dealt with, there realistically isn't. The closest is Israel, though that would be in reference to my childhood, going to my teenage years, in reference to Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, as well as the Army. And so, and I was born and raised in New Jersey. I do know the difference regarding Yanta and Yeti. Just saying, just throwing that out there. And so I know the difference, but that's the other factor. And so when you take in consideration Memorial Day this year in 2022, as well as in reference to September, well, it's 21 years. So I'll make a reference to the Adele song, "We're Not Kids Anymore," when it comes to technology. As many decades as I have made attempts to give warnings where I could, individuals had their opinions as far as that was concerned. Made attempts. So I'm for the Second Amendment. I'm for the constitutional rights and amendments of the United States of America. 10 Commandments are important, though. The foundation of the country is a Judeo-Christian foundation with Native American acceptance. It's the facts, 10 Commandments. So your constitutional rights within the 10 Commandments. It's very simple. And so when you have the situations regarding Excalibur Fair and those types of false reports wrongly, which is bearing false witness, it doesn't matter if it's pretend or not, the facts are. How many individuals overall have dealt with that in comparison? And what are the circumstances as to, and how many times? So, in regards of my scuba diving, well, the civilians could have just spoken with me. They made the choices that they made. I had spoken with them. I made attempts. Sure, I was only awake from my coma 9 years. Well, technically being awake from my coma, or from the time, technically it would have been almost 9 years when I got into scuba diving from the time frame of my coma. It's like 8 3/4 or 8 4/5 years to the time frame of getting involved with scuba diving. And only not even a full year as to when the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain had fully dissipated. But I was honest about it. And so, being a unattached female when entering scuba diving is to the facts. Because usually people who enter the civilian recreational scuba dive sector, they're in a relationship with another scuba diver if they're a female. Seldomly not. And usually those females have mommy and or daddy to pay for it. In comparison to myself. And so 2009 and the memory of the facts. So, and there's the situations as they went, and what was my family was to those times, and I'm not the only one who's dealt with certain things. But the time frame as to the technological and scientific advances, the instruments of the technological advances have been widely available for decades. It's just whether or not people paid attention to the truth of that, or if they wanted to keep themselves deluded in comparison. And so I was surprised twice in a multitude of ways. I also don't know what had occurred between 2013 to 2019. Nobody informed me. So if by the irony of fail-safe as to anything that occurred, I mean, I wouldn't know. There isn't anybody who would have told me that. I was just being creative. That's all. which I clarified in my updates regarding my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susanmealing.com, which is also the same as www.ladydorybell.com. And so the time frame of in Washington State, I had remembered who I am. I went over that in regards of my journal blog updates. I just didn't do this regarding official YouTube video aspects. Subscribe to my official YouTube channel, like my official YouTube videos, because I was in person, face to face in person with people. I didn't have an internal need to bring that up as a reminder, because there wasn't any point for me to do so. At those points, similarly to the state of Texas, regarding situations such as my scuba diving, among a few other factors, there's only one person to speak with. Anybody who would make a false representation of themselves would be that. Because I'm the one who, so for example, regarding my modeling, all of the photographers I personally contacted. I didn't have anybody contact them, and if somebody did, there'd be something to review in those capacities, in comparison to assuming. That's where you speak with, and to ask and verify, to clarify in comparison to assuming, in that hypothetical. That probably has been a problem needlessly far longer, but those are the facts. And so, quite a few situations to take into that consideration. That's important. So, I've remembered quite a bit more than some might have wanted to actually acknowledge in truth. But those clarifications and verifications have been important because of the truth. And so, while some people might have wished to delude themselves as to certain other factors in comparison, that's their viewpoint that they have to deal with. How many people have thought military guys are ignorant, and yet at the same time, they don't pay for their college the same way financially. They don't pay for their books the same way financially. They usually don't even have to live on a dormitory, campus ground area in comparison, which in turn translates they don't have to pay for that. And a few other factors in comparison. Bills are paid up front in comparison to a loan. Yes, they give a loan for houses. It's a different situation. However, for school, that's paid up front. That education is paid up front. Obviously. So, I know that's an issue for certain individuals regarding the college aspects. So, regards of memorial to my scuba diving, well, there's the General Hoyt S. Vandenberg. What better or bigger of a memorial out of respect regarding all of the lives that had ever been on that particular naval vessel. However, I know the civilian recreational scuba divers have been as they've been. Just as similarly regarding the various aspects, because, you know, there's only one person to speak with in those references regarding my scuba diving. I haven't ever allowed anybody to speak on my behalf. That's not a freedom of expression, by the way, because you have to actually have permission. So otherwise it would be breaking the 10 Commandments to speak on my behalf in any capacity. That would be blasphemy. That would be taking name in vanity. That would be bearing false witness. That would be coveting what's not thou's. Be all 7 deadly sins as well, all wrapped up in one, male or female, in those capacities. And so the situations are as they are. I made the attempts that I did, and instead, well, I can't believe in any state, the state of Texas. That would be such a needless problem because of how important earned valor actually is in comparison to the pomp and circumstance that some people have in those references. So it's my particular opinion, though I tend to take things a smidgen more seriously. I've learned in comparison to viewing things as games. I just don't have that capacity because I see how important life is. Then again, I was born and raised in the tri-state area in the 1980s and into the 1990s during that time frame. So I have a very different viewpoint as to being grateful and appreciative of life in genuinity because of knowing where I had been, knowing where I had gone, knowing who I knew. And yet, so there's a few things to the Memorial Day of 2022 for me. So the time frame of making sure to clarify and verify as best as I could, because then there's the merger in regards of T-Mobile and AT&T and Verizon to Sprint, and that warp speed situation as to that official release and reveal. And so while some people, however their opinions were regarding whatever time frame of, made the best attempts I could. And so on this Memorial Day, obviously, the reflection as to the work, the worth of. So, but with the inflation situations as to other factors and those references as to the length of time, well, there is that. Sometimes you have to cauterize a wound so that way you don't bleed out anymore. And so there's those factors in addition. And thus, regarding my work, so there is the Keystone Pipeline in a different capacity in comparison to my Medal of Honor or project trips, my Medal of Honor or project work. Though it is an irony regarding March of 2020, as well as a few other factors, nonetheless, 2019. So there's the reality regarding the Keystone Pipeline. And so E equals MC square has been discussing in certain videos on YouTube about the Hyperloop and the drilling and so on and so forth, and going underneath whatever level of, with whatever company factors in those situations. Well, is the Keystone Pipeline having needed to have the updates so that across the infrastructure, all of the material is actually symbiotic in comparison to one state's regulation to another state's regulation to another state's regulation? Because that underground factor in comparison to on the ground, well, that's a different type of uniformity. Because under the ground, in one area, as to the soil content, is going to be different than others, as well as the laying of the lines. So, in reference to the Keystone Pipeline and the version of tonnage weight, though whatever it would be in that reference, well, what is the consideration to think about as to the oil production? So if that's a situation, though in conjunction other factors that have been brought about, what would be important to consider as to the oil production and gas prices. Gas prices obviously need to decline. However, the situations of the if factors to the infrastructure, such as what occurred in the state of Georgia in the year of either 2019 or 2020 in reference to a farming plant, and those pipes, as well as the state of Florida in 2020 or 2021, and those pipes. There's also the state of Texas regarding those pipes, and other areas such as California and Oregon in regards of pipelines of whichever type, and those rolling factors to consider. And so the energetic production would be something to review as to that. So if in the majority of time frames it's been the viewpoint as to the individual states as to the underground portions in comparison to the federal regulations because of the construction, well, if there's certain connection pieces, that's something to review. Though having to have it affordable, of course, and yet, as President of the United States of America 44, Barack Obama, as well as President of the United States of America 46, Joe Biden, had brought up the George Floyd 1 year memorial situation. Well, what would there be as a connection regarding in the state of Texas, other than the Houston area of the state of Texas, to take into consideration, to remember, hypothetically? So there's my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susanmealing.com, which is the same as www.ladydorybell.com. And so while, yes, I had begun some aspects in comparison to 2004 and 2005 in the year of 2009 and to 2010 regarding what's supposed to be considered the adult consenting lifestyle. Well, I did not consent to quite a few factors. And so, sure, I'm a female dominant in leather. It's a difference, quite a few capacities. And I have been involved since 2004 into 2005 compared to the FetLife account. That in-person, face-to-face in-person is really important. I can't be the only person who knows that the lifestyle has been around longer than FetLife. Or am I? Because obviously the state of Texas isn't the only location in the United States of America that's had a lifestyle that's supposed to be as to the biological adult consenting. And in order to consent, it requires officially being informed. So that way there's the capability to consent. It's important. So, but yes, I'm a biological female. And so in the state of Texas, being a biological female, leather dominant, yeah, and those types of situations, which why would anybody ever take that in consideration? You know, especially with that drama type of stuff in comparison. So regarding scuba diving and the 40 feet to the rebreather, so there was this book series that came out around 2010, 2011, and the general aspects, the 50 Shades of Grey. 50 Shades of bullshit, in my opinion. Which the irony is that, if I remember correctly, from what I had heard or briefly read in the final part of that particular book series, the male dominant becomes a submissive to the female in that comparison, which is an irony instead as to that. However, I gave warnings because I was dealing with that regarding quite a few males to that situation. And so yeah, there's that, no denying. And so I created my book series, The Paroxysm of the Lotus, as far as that's concerned in comparison, because there's multitudes of factors as to the lifestyle. It's supposed to be biological adult consenting compared to, and there's various myriads of factors throughout. And so I know some like to assume, in comparison to what it actually is. And so that is as it is. If I wouldn't be surprised if people in the state of Texas didn't really think about having been born and raised in New Jersey and having went up to the tri-state area surrounding, such as New York City. That seemed common sense-ish to me. However, you know, what would my biological father, having been certified by the School of Bulova and capable to cast jewelry, that ever be? I mean, what areas in the 5 boroughs would have certain types of situations? I mean, I can tell the difference in jewelry, and not just in reference to the clarity or the cut, the color or enhancements or anything like that. Settings, carat. Anyway, like that. You know, more in the relationship factor. yeah. Because how that goes. To the difference of a one and only compared to the difference of whatever relationship situations, comparatively. Referencing jewelry. I mean, it was just the 1980s, which is after the 1970s. And there's the 1990s. New York City. I mean, what happened in New York City that there would ever be any correlations whatsoever? other than a lot, you know, there's a few areas. Other than politics, there's Broadway and other, yeah. So it wouldn't be a surprise in those references as to thinking, you know, thinking that just because I look as I do and being medically retired, in comparison to ever thinking that I'm medically retired. And yeah, sure, I didn't graduate basic training. Whether or not those hypotheticals knew that I had been invited to Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, hypothetically, and what's supposed to be considered the adult consenting lifestyle in comparison, because that would be important to think about as far as that's concerned, because of my type of scuba diving. In comparison, you know, because of 115 feet to the top of the tower. Again, there's those videos I saw more recently, I think it was 2021, where they were produced in the 1950s or 1960s at the latest, of seals going in the underbelly of a submarine to surface and decompress. In comparison to, I haven't ever seen a submarine transported on land. Have not ever seen that. I've seen the wind turbine fan blades. Not having ever seen any propellers for a boat. A real one, you know, a military vessel. Just gonna point that out there. And so, you know, that Lexington boat out off of the Gulf Coast, you know, it looks like it could be a tugboat to pull the Vandenberg out, as far as the size, what the engine would be. In comparison, hypothetically, to the Vandenberg, just think of how much towing capacity would be mandatory to pull that out to the area of, and the power that would be required because of the current as to the formation of the Gulf of Mexico, because, you know, there's that fact of that current on the tip of Florida. So just think of how strong that tugboat would have to be to pull the Vandenberg out. So I've seen a few pictures, and so it kind of looks like about a bigger version of the Lexington that pulled out the Vandenberg, regarding the footage I had seen. The Nimitz looks small. However, it could be that water distortion. Then again, there is the rear side mirrors on a car to take in consideration those references. So, thanks for tuning in to my official YouTube channel. Hopefully, there's quite a bit to think about as to memories. Hopefully, more positive and happy memories. And if not, the capability to find ways to progress forward to make better memories for the highest good and actual progress of betterment. So, subscribe to my official YouTube channel, like my official YouTube videos, share my official YouTube video links, and go to my website www.susanmealing.com, which is the same as www.ladydoribelle.com. And in closing, let's see. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grace. for purple mountains, majesties above the fruited plains. America, America, God shed His grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Happy Memorial Day.